A lesson from God's Word. Luckily, Greg had contacted me Friday evening as I was going to work. I wanted to know if I could preach this morning, and luckily I had just preached a lesson the following Sunday, and so I had something that I could preach on this morning, and it's a little dated, as you'll see from the title here. Labor Day. I wanted to present it as we had some things on our mind toward Labor Day, so it's a little dated, but if it's from God's truth, then these truths are timeless, and it doesn't matter when we preach a lesson, the truth is the truth always. So, yes, this is a little dated, a week out of date, but I'm sure you'll understand. Labor Day is the first Monday in September where labor is suspended in order to give honor to those who labor. And I think that's a good thing that we do in this nation. Workers are the backbone of all nations, and it's right to honor those who keep the nations going, running, functioning, supplying the needs of man. And God esteems those who do honorable work. And so we need to esteem those as well who do honorable work. First of all, this morning, I can't think of anyone more needing to be honored for the works in which he has done than God. We had read for us a while ago Psalms 111, and that's exactly what that text is doing. It is honoring God and praising Him for all of His wondrous works in which He has done. And it says there that these works are to be remembered. So above all, we certainly need to remember God and His works in which He has done. In Psalms 104 and in verse 23, beginning, it says, "Man goeth forth unto his work and to his labor until evening. O Lord, how manifold are thy works! In wisdom thou hast made them all. The earth is full of thy riches. So is this great and wide sea, wherein are things creeping innumerable, both small and great beasts." Here he compares man's work. He labors all day long and accomplishes much. But now in comparison to God's manifold works, they're nothing. We see that we should always be prepared to remember the works of God. In Psalms 78 and in verse 5, it says, "For he established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, which he commanded to our fathers, that they should make them known to their children, that the generation to come might know them, even the children which should be born, who should arise and declare them to their children, that they might set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments." But all the wondrous works that God had done for Israel, that they were to remember. Working great salvations, leading the children of Israel out of slavery into the promised land, delivering them from the Egyptians and destroying the Egyptians in the Red Sea. How many times did God save His people and provide for His people and do so many wondrous works? And here we see, teach them to your children always. Well, shouldn't we? And that's something that we need to be doing, remembering God's works. Not only those where He delivered Israel, but what about the works of salvation that God has provided for us? Spiritual salvation. Above all things, we need to remember these type things and teach them to our children. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, beginning in verse 11, it says, He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, He has put eternity in their hearts, except that no one can find out the work that God does from beginning to end. I know that nothing is better for them than to rejoice and to do good in their lives. And also every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of his labor. It is the gift of God. Here again we see the idea of God's works being, we can't even know all the things in which God has done and worked for us. And again, the comparison man is made of man's works. But how can we do that? It'd be impossible without God's works. It'd be impossible without the gifts that God has given us, the ability to breathe and to sustain ourselves and to labor and to move and to work with these wondrous bodies in which God has given us, and we have the good health to go out and to labor. All that would be impossible without the things in which God has done for us. And we'll remember and we'll look here in a few moments at the works in which man does. But he says this is a gift of God, that man is able to work with his own hands and to earn a living and to enjoy the good things in which we have. And Labor Day was such a good example of that time in which man could sit back and enjoy the fruits of his labors and enjoy them on such a day as Labor Day. But all of that would be impossible without the blessings of God. You know, it's good for man to have such times as Labor Day, a time to rest and to reflect and spend time with their families. You know, it even mentioned of God as resting there on the seventh day. That is, when God made all of creation, He ceased from His labors. That doesn't mean that God still wasn't working, God still wasn't doing things, but I find it interesting there that the text says He rested. He ceased from laboring there, for at least in regard to that. So we see a need for rest. But another example for us to look at is of that of Jesus. Jesus shows us the urgency in which He had to work. He says in Luke 2 and in verse 49, He says, I must be about my Father's business. Very important. I have to be working. Only got a limited amount of time. This is urgent. In John 9 and in verse 4, He says, I must work the works of Him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. Work while we still have opportunity. He says there's a limited time. And I have to be busy about my Father's business. Not only teaching God's Word, but confirming that He was, in fact, who He claimed to be, the Son of God. In Acts 10 and in verse 38, it says, how God anointed Jesus of Nazareth with the Holy Spirit and with power, who went about doing good and healing all that were oppressed of the devil, for God was with Him. There He went about doing many good works, confirming, in fact, who He was, teaching. And Jesus was so busy once He became popular that people came from all over. He didn't have a moment's rest. He would have to steal away in the night to even just have a little time alone to pray and to talk with God. And He shows us also not only importance and urgency of being working and doing the Father's business and being busy, but He also shows us the importance of and need of a time of rest. In Mark 6 and in verse 30, it says, and the apostles gathered themselves together unto Jesus and told Him all things, both what they had done and what they had taught. And He said unto them, come ye yourselves apart into a desert place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they had no leisure so much as to eat, and they departed into a desert place by ship privately. So many coming. He nor his disciples even had time to take a break hardly. But he said, yes, take a break. We need time to rest and to recuperate. We need time for rebuilding ourselves, taking a little time off, taking time with our families, taking time to be with God in prayer and study. And we need time to rest. Jesus certainly is our example in 1 Peter 2 and in verse 21. It says, for even hereunto you are called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example. What a great example. But let me give you a bad example. Satan. Make no mistake about it. He's a worker. I've always said there's always something good you can find about anybody. I guess if you're going to find something good about Satan, you could say, well, he's a worker. His works may be evil, but he's a worker and he doesn't give up. He's very diligent about the work in which he does. 1 Peter 5 and in verse 8 describes him as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Might not look like he's doing much. This picture of a lion, I think, illustrates Satan very well. I've seen different videos of lions that just be lying there in a desert, a little area where it doesn't seem to be very much around. They just lay there. Don't seem to be doing very much. But he's very much doing something. He's waiting. He's biding his time. He's always watchful. He's always looking. He's just waiting for that prey just to get close enough. And then boom, he's got him in his grasp to destroy him. That's exactly what Satan does. He's always working, always alert, always looking for that opportunity to undermine the works of God, to destroy them and to destroy us, just waiting for us to get within his reach. Be careful. He's vigilant. 1 John 3 and in verse 8 there we see that Jesus came to destroy the works of the devil. He's got lots of works. Always working, always trying to undermine the things of God. Now, I went out of my way to mention about God and Jesus and showing there a need for rest, that they took time to rest. I don't know, and if you find one, let me know. I'd be interested. But as I was preparing this lesson, I cannot think of a passage anywhere that would ever indicate one bit that Satan ever takes a rest. He's always looking for those opportunities to destroy us. That doesn't mean God isn't going to stop him. Going to stop him from working when it's at some point in time. Doesn't mean that he's restrained, but he's doing his best all the time, as far as I can tell, to work against the things of God. So let's be careful and always remember that. But us, men. That's really what I want to talk about this morning in our lesson. Now, I come to a crossroads in preparing this lesson. I could have gone one of two different ways. I could go and talk about how man needs to be busy laboring in the things of God, working against Satan, that we have just a limited time and we need to be busy about our Father's business. Certainly that's true. But I didn't go that route. I want us to go a different route this morning as this lesson was prepared and with the idea of physical labor. So I want us to think more about those types of works of man. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, and in verse 11, it says, "And that ye study to be quiet, that you do your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you, that you walk honestly toward those that are without, and that you may have lack of nothing." Here we see several important lessons for us here in this little text. That we need to mind our own business. We need to be working. Something very important. We need to be working and be busy about our own business. And when we do that, we need to be walking honestly toward those that are without, and also those that are within. We do this in order to working to provide for ourselves, but we're to do it honestly. Make an honest living. Honest work. There are ways in which are acceptable to God to earn a living, ways, and there are ways that are unacceptable to God as well, as we'll note here in just a moment. But we certainly see that man is to work to provide for himself, for his family, and for others. If you would notice Ephesians, 1 Timothy 5, and then in verse 8 there, getting ahead of myself. There we see that one, if he provide not for his own household, is worse than an unbeliever. Worse than an unbeliever, one who does not provide not only for himself, but for his family. Let's be working. This is the passage that I was about to jump to, Ephesians 4, and in verse 28, where it says, "Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor." There we see an unacceptable means of gaining and providing for ourselves and our families. We're not to do it by stealing, extortion, or any other type of ill-gotten gains. But he says, but rather labor, working with your hands the thing which is good, that you may have to give to him that needeth. Here's something else we learn. Not only provide for ourselves, for our families, but we labor for another purpose, to give. We have opportunity in a few moments to give back unto God and to the work of the church here in this place. That's one means in which we're to give. But that's not the only means. Our responsibility doesn't end there, does it? No. We find here that we're to give to those who are in need. That's a means of being able to live as well. A gift. Buying, selling, trading. These are honorable means of earning a living versus stealing or extortion or some other means. So let's remember that we have a responsibility in these areas. That's why we're working, not just for ourselves, not just for selfish reasons. And when we work, let's do the best that we can at whatever we're working at. Passage, I'm sure when I mention this comes to mind, Ecclesiastes 9 and in verse 10. He says, "Whatsoever your hand findeth to do, do it with all of your might, for there is no work, nor device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave whither thou goest." There we see the reason for the urgency to be working while we have the opportunity, because one day we're going to die. He says, work now. Work now. And whenever you work, do it with all of your might. Isn't that what we see God doing and Jesus doing, even Satan doing? What did they do mediocre? What did they do halfway? There are, well, at least two of them are example. One of them we don't want to follow his example. But here they did things the very best, and so we need to be doing the very best that we can in all of our labor. But that's not the idea in society today, is it? just get it out the door as fast as we can, just do things halfway. No, we need to take honor in the things in which we do and do the very best that we can. I don't know who penned these lines, but the title of it is Always Finish. It says, if a task is once begun, never leave it till it's done. Be the labor great or small, do it well or not at all. And I think that's the words in which we need to live by as well. Do the best in which we can do, whatever we find to do. Let's realize that we can accomplish great things in our labor. The number one example I think about is those in Nehemiah's day. In Nehemiah 4 and in verse 6 it says, so we built the wall, and all the wall was joined together unto the half thereof, for the people had a mind to work. They were able to accomplish great things for that very reason. They had a mind to work. They were working together. It shows the power of unity, being able to accomplish great things. Here the enemy of God was standing all around just waiting for an opportunity to stop their labors, but they never gave them the chance. They were all working together. They had a mind to work. They were going to finish it and do the job, and they didn't leave it until it was done. And we need to have that type of attitude as well, and remember that we can do great things in our labors. We can accomplish much, even though people may be trying to stop us. In this great country in which we live in, I think of all the immigrants that came to this country that come from places where they didn't have opportunities to do great things. They were hindered by the circumstances in which they were in. But they heard of the opportunities of this great land, and they came here and they built lives for their families. And many of them didn't stop there. They built great empires and became very rich and accomplished things greater than they ever imagined. Yes, we can accomplish great things if we set our mind to it. So let us be working, doing the best we can, accomplishing much. Now, this might seem contradictory to some things I said earlier. Let's first read our text in 2 Thessalonians 3 and in verse 10. Beginning, it says, for even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. For we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Now them that are such we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they shall work and eat their own bread. Here are Christians who'd left off working. As I understand some of the things I read, that probably they were expecting the Lord to come at any time. And so they had just left off working. He said, no, that's not acceptable. We don't know when the Lord's going to come. He says, you need to go back to work. Don't be a bum. Don't be eating other people's bread. You need to work with your own hands, get your own bread. And if you won't work, then you don't need to be giving them your bread, because they shouldn't be eating, because they're not working for themselves. And I think that's something that we need to remember. We have a lot of parasites, I think, in this great nation in which we live in, just looking for opportunities to feed off of others. And that's not the way God intended it. And while I know we're to give, but when we talked about giving a while ago, it was very explicit. It was for those who were in need. It was for those who could not provide for themselves. Here we find able-bodied men and women able to provide for themselves, yet they're bumming off of other people. He said, that's not right. Don't give them anything. Let them not eat. They get hungry enough, they'll go back to work. That's what he's saying. And yet we see in our society today a lot of people who seem to think that somehow or another they deserve a meal ticket, just a free meal. They just, because of who they are, I guess, they just deserve it. You know, I was kind of shocked when I moved back to Columbia, Tennessee, growing up around this area, and moved off for just a few years, and to come back here and to go to the courthouse or go to Walmart or go to the filling station or go to a host of other places, all the time having people coming up to me wanting money. Hey, come here. Here, could you help me out? Could you give me a little? Maybe they're in genuine need. But you know what? I know a lot of people who are in need that I can verify why they're in need. They're out of work because of some accident or some other thing, or they're living in another country where there just isn't enough to go around. There's ample opportunities of people who cannot provide for themselves that I can give to without able-bodied men and women coming up to me and me just giving them a handout. I don't think that's right. We need to be careful about that. We may be enabling them in things in which they shouldn't be doing. I saw, I don't know if it was on the news or Facebook or what, but because of the COVID-19 thing, and because many were out of work, I can understand the government doing this, suspending landlords from evicting people from their homes during a time in which people couldn't help themselves and couldn't work. That was a good thing. That was a good law that was passed. And one of the posts I saw, there was a woman holding up a sign in protest that was about to expire. And on the sign it said, "No more evictions." Now, maybe I took that wrong, but the way I took that was, she just meant, no more evictions ever. Here I ought to just be able to live rent-free and not have to worry about working, and you just can't never kick me out of my home. That's not right. As I was driving down Columbia on 31, I see a lot of times people out there holding signs. That's their job. You don't want to get evicted? Lay down that sign and go grab one of these others and get a job and pay your rent. That's what God expects of us. He expects us to labor. I knew a brother in Christ who, his son, he told me that he'd been an engineer, made tons of money, but he lost his job. And after that, he lost the will to work. And he just wouldn't work. He just quit even trying to look for a job. And his father was so concerned about him that on his retirement income, what he had, he sent it to him every week, just about every penny he had. His son was a leech. This man did not have enough food to get him through the week. Me and Tracy would go and take him food because I knew what he was doing. He was sending every penny that he had to his son. And I didn't want him to go without. I wouldn't ever send a penny to his son. But I was going to take care of that man. I wanted to make sure he had plenty. Work banishes three great evils: boredom, vice, and poverty. We often hear idle hands, or I'd even substitute a idle mind, or the devil's workshop. I think that's a good saying. A lot of people think that comes from the Bible. It's not per se in the Bible, but it is a good idea. Proverbs 6 and in verse 9 says, "How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that travaileth, and thy want as an armed man." He says, you don't want to work, you want to just lay around. He says, well, then your laziness is going to take everything you've got. It's going to come as an armed man. Poverty will come upon you. Let's be careful that we are workers and not lazy. Now, I do have a little feeling for this man I want to tell you about. I can kind of relate a little bit, but there was a man who went to his doctor and he said, "Doc, I just lost all my energy. I just don't feel like doing things around the house like I used to, and I think there might be something wrong." And so the doctor gave him a thorough examination, and after the examination, he said, "Well, Doc, did you find anything wrong with me?" He said, "Yeah, you're lazy." He said, "Well, great, Doc." Said, "I'm glad you found that out." Said, "Now could you give me a medical term so I could go home and tell my wife?" I can kind of relate with that a little bit, but let's make sure that we're not being lazy people. But there is a time for those who are laboring to rest. We need rest from our labors. And God certainly recognizes that. Now this passage here is an Old Testament passage there in regard to the Old Testament law there where God instituted the Sabbath and made the Sabbath a day of rest. It was really a day of worship. But as they were remembering God and the great things which God did, they also enjoyed that benefit of having a time of rest. And I think God expects us as well to take a rest from time to time from our labors. And such days, or Labor Day, or other holidays. We're so fortunate in this society in which we live in that we just have a 5-day work week, most of us. Most time I work 6, it seems like. But very few people work 7 days a week. Almost all of us get a day of rest. And what a blessing that is that we can live in such a place as this. That we have abundant riches that we can take a couple of days off. Most places in the world, that's not that way. They have to scrimp and do whatever they can and hustle just to try to get by each and every day. It's a day-by-day thing just to make a living and to survive that day in a lot of places. But we're not in that condition. We're so richly blessed that we can enjoy the fruits of our labors and take time off and rest more. So as we have the opportunity to do that, let's do that. Enjoy the rest. Enjoy the good in which God has given us and give honor unto Him for it. Well, this morning, the lesson is yours, but I ask you the question, have you been laboring for the Lord? Have you entered into His vineyard this morning? Are you working for Him? And if not, then why not? Because if we want to have that promised rest one day, we can't get there without first doing the labor. We have to put the work in first, just like anything. If we want a day of rest, we first need to be laboring, don't we? Well, in Matthew chapter 11, beginning in verse 28, Jesus says, "Come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." There He invites us to come unto Him. Those who are heavy laden and burdened with sin in which they cannot remove from themselves, He says, I'll give you rest from that burden. He says, but also you've got to do something for me. You've got to take on my yoke. You've got to labor for me. You've got to serve me. And then we can have that promised rest of all eternity, living with Jesus. Have you done that this morning? Have you become a child of God, laboring for the Lord? If not, why not? Or if you had, but you've fallen away, why not come back? Whatever your need this evening, if you're burdened down with sin in some way, let that be known. If we can help you in any way, we'll certainly do whatever we can to help you. If you'd only come now while we stand and while we sing.
light that is drawn by rejecting